got the old so deep inside of me. I am the old soul, you see. I never was young, I always felt the same. I am the old soul, you see. For all of my waking hours and all of my restless sleep, I have only one conclusion. I have but a choice to keep. Be there for you. Be there for you. Be there for you. Be there for you. Be there for you.
I am the old soul in modern time. The lights get brighter each day, and in my own way, I wait upon the time. It won't be long. Now you'll see.
For all of my waking hours and all of my restless dreams, I have only one conclusion. I have but a choice to keep. Be there for you. 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 Be there for I am the old soul in a modern time. I am the old soul, you see.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. The haunting, romantic sound of our guest tonight, Colin Macleod, and his song Old Soul, featuring the vocal talents of Sheryl Crow, no less. What was the lyric? I'm an old soul in a modern time. Tell me about it. Welcome on and all, and welcome to our first Untangled conversation of 2022, brought to you courtesy of Salmon and Trout Conservation and me, Matthew Wright. Thank you for giving up your time. I'm really delighted a couple of hundred of you registered to attend this evening. Thank you for your questions. We'll be getting onto them in just a bit. Thank you for your passion. I think that's really what's brought all of us here today. And thank you, Colin Macleod, singer, songwriter, crofter, who lives and works up in Lewis in the Western Isles. Good evening to you, sir.
How's it going? Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. And a beautiful song, a beautiful video, and I'm sure I'm not the only person watching that thought, "Oh, that looks quite fishy." Anyway, we'll get on to fishing in a moment. But for those of you who've not joined one of these Untangled conversations before, well, what started as an idea to stop us getting bored during lockdown has now turned out to become quite a popular fixture. I try to keep things as convivial as possible. Those who imbibe are encouraged to do so, and I believe Colin's got a scotch on the go. We'll talk about that in a bit. And I'm currently based in North Caicos, taking folk bone fishing, in case you're wondering. So I've got a refreshing beer. Colin's in Lewis. You're all at your various locations in the UK or further afield. And I know there's a very dark side to the technology that we could talk about, but right now I'm just thinking the internet is really the most amazing thing at bringing us all together. So Colin, it's probably the most tedious of questions, but it's also one of the most obvious, which is, are you a crofter first? I mean, it must have such a huge demand on your time. Or are you a musician, or can you run both things concurrently?
Yeah, that's an often asked question, because it's a very strange thing. It's not an easy bedfellow being a touring musician and a crofter with a bunch of sheep, but I don't know. Hebridean, I suppose. Hebridean first and everything else second, I would say.
Well, as a crofter, I take it as a given. You have to turn your hand to many things. Mm-hmm. What are the sort of highlights of your year out there in Lewis?
Well, crofting, in its kind of truest sense, is subsistence farming. So it's not just about the animals and the kind of the farming aspect of it. It's kind of a bit kind of broader than that. Traditionally, crofters would cut peat to kind of fuel their fire and their hot water and their heating. That's what we do in the house here. So you're kind of getting a apportionment of the moor that sits alongside your croft that you can use for peat. But also, you know, it was a bit of kind of like a jack of all trades thing. You'd do some fishing. You'd, like in the summer when the herring and the mackerel are in, you go and catch them, freeze them. In the springtime, you're lambing and cutting peats, and then in the autumn, you're harvesting and you're kind of doing all that. So it's really, it was never a financial thing, I don't think, ever for the people that did it. Everyone always had another job alongside it, but the ethos and the sort of the thing about crofting was just having a good life and providing for your family and living off the land. So that's kind of what I subscribe to. I think it kind of bleeds into all aspects of my life, actually, funnily enough. I think that sort of kind of seasonal thing lends itself quite well with music. I'll go and tour when it's quiet at home, and I'll come home in the summer and fish and look after the sheep and do all that kind of other stuff. So that's it in a nutshell, basically. That's what it's all about. It's
quite obvious from the two albums that that life out there, it infuses your songwriting.
Yeah.
More so in the new album?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit more condensed. Like I kind of really tried to focus in on it a little bit on the newer album. I made a conscious effort a few years ago when I did the album before last, to sort of write more about my homeland. It always inspired me, but when I was younger, I found it hard to get the two to sit well together, like being in London at fligging parties or whatever, and then you come home and you're at the Fank and you're turning sheep over. It didn't seem like the two went well together. But as I kind of got older, I realized that like my place in the world and where I'm from was just so, like, it was informing my writing so much that was how it fit together. So I made a bit more of a conscious effort to embrace it, I think. Sort of like that School of Bruce Springsteen kind of thing, you know, write about your hometown.
Write about what you know, write about what you know. And to establish a little bit further, crofting is something that is in the blood. I mean, it goes back through your family, through generations.
Yeah. On my father's side, it goes back all the way, as far as we know. And in the same village, I live 2 doors along from my father, mum and dad, and his father was in that house and his grandfather, and my sister lives in a house in the next village along that my great grandfather owns. So it's way back.
Well, there was a period when you I don't know whether it not turned you back from it, but you moved down, like you said, pursuing music. I mean, that must have been, what did your family think of that at the time?
Oh, they were happy. They were chuffed, you know. I mean, it was a pretty strange thing, you know. And I left school and I was like, I'm going to have a go at music. And you're from an island in the middle of the Atlantic. People go well, London's very far away. But then I got offered a record deal, so everybody's ears pricked up a little bit. But yeah, they were really supportive, and that was kind of at that time where social media wasn't the driving force it is today. It was just on the cusp of that thing. So when I signed the label, and the guy that signed me was like, come to London, and you have to be in London, you have to be around the industry, you have to be around the music, and which was fantastic. And I it was an amazing apprenticeship. I was just got to work in some fantastic studios and work with amazing writers and producers. But I always had one foot at home. I was in London for a reason, but I always knew where my home was. So yeah.
So everybody here today has a common interest, that's for sure. And they're probably dying to know, as I am, how salmon and maybe sea trout feature in your life.
Well, I actually became a musician by accident, because I was starting out as a gillie. When I was 15, I went to Grimmerstow Estate and Lewis on work experience. I was fishing daft, and I was like, all I wanted to do was go fishing. And someone told me, I think it was my dad said to me, he says, you can get a job taking people salmon fishing. I was like, that's I'm going to do forevermore. And then, so I started at Grimmerstow when I was 16 as a second gillie. The second gillie sat in the bow of the boat. So when it got too windy, the gillie would pass you the oars, and you'd have a wee turn rowing so you could have a fag and a cup of coffee. So that was my first job. And then through that, a guy called Jason Lang introduced me to the world of girls and guitars. And then my gillying path sort of took a little right turn towards guitars. Yeah, that was it.
In terms of it now, do you still go out gillying for people? Do you get the time to do that?
Yeah, I do. I spent all last summer gillying. I didn't do it for a while. I moved to London, and I was kind of immersed in the music scene for a good sort of 5-6 years. But when I moved home, I still kept my hand in, and if people asked me, I would go and help out. And I would in the summer go to a wee estate called Barvis and keep an eye on things there. And if anybody wants a hand, I give them a hand. But yeah, it's not something you can get out of you. I think once it's in gilly, and it's a lifetime passion. I think.
It can be very hard managing people's disappointment. I hear that a lot from gillies I speak to, because the salmon fishing isn't what it used to be. I mean, there's no denying it's in a terrible state. Well, I mean, I think things are probably better in the Western Isles maybe than they are on the mainland. But how would you describe the situation as you perceive it up there for wild Atlantic salmon?
I would kind of tentatively say that it's a little bit of a haven up here. It seems like the runs hold up fairly well. I mean, there's definitely a decline. It's kind of, it's plain enough to see. I mean, I started when I was 15, 16. The first year I was at Grimmerstow, and I think on the first week of July, there was 98 fish caught for the week. And those things just don't happen anymore, So there's definitely a decline, but we saw good numbers of fish in 2020. There was a lot of fish in the sea. I'm lucky enough to work at a place on the island where the fish will congregate in the sea, so you get a good idea. And I mean, yeah, it's decent. It's still decent, and I think the story's the same on the kind of northern and the kind of east coast rivers up in the Highlands. Their numbers seem to be holding up fairly well. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, it's been last month now, 2 weeks back, we saw the publication of the Griggs report into Scottish salmon farming, welcomed by the Scottish government, which might set alarm bells ringing for some. And at Salmon and Trout Conservation, we're arguing that Griggs' basic assumption is that salmon farming provides sustainable economic benefit and should therefore be encouraged and expanded. And we would argue that entire assumption is flawed, because there is no evidence anywhere, not from Scotland or anywhere it's been tried, that salmon farming can be considered to be sustainable. What are your thoughts on that, Colin?
I've seen the evidence of the destruction that fish farms can do firsthand. I mean, I think there's always a bit of a battle between scientific against kind of colloquial, or, you know, that kind of local knowledge. But, you know, I've caught finnock and smolts with hundreds of little sea lice on them coming back in the freshwater, trying to migrate and coming back in to try and get rid of those. Now, I don't think I can only go with the evidence I have in front of me, but in my hands, and the evidence is plain to see that it's not a good way to make food for humans, and it's not a good way to it's not a good way to protect a species of fish that's kind of really declining, and everybody can see it's declining. Of course, I think the big thing about fish farming, especially in the West Coast, is actually just showing it to people that don't fish. Fishermen are very, like, they know what they're seeing and they know what's going on, but it's just trying to communicate that to somebody that's going into Tesco's and buying a side of smoked salmon is a really difficult thing. So aside from the kind of the bigger thing that's going on with Parliament and that big battle that's happening between big corporations with lots of money and they're kind of effectively waging a war on wild fish.
Yeah.
The thing aside from that is me just explaining to people how bad it is for them to put that in their bodies and what effect it does, and trying to get that to resonate. So yeah, it's really visceral in the islands, I think. We've had fish farms here since the 80s, so you see it. You see those big tubs of chemicals sat on the pier on the west coast of Lewis, and you see what's going on, you know. But of course, your best pal, his family and his, you know, house is paid for with fish farms, and he works for the fish farm, and it's like, I don't want to see my best pal get put out of a job. It's a really hard one. It's a hard one to level with your kind of soul, you know.
I was just about to raise that point, that the crofting is sustainable, you know, it's sustainable subsistence farming, and then you've got people just like that who are entirely dependent on fish farming, and they're in the problem. I mean, that will include, as you just said, friends and neighbours. It's a number of people have asked whether just giving up eating farm salmon is the way to go, and spreading that as a message. And I'm assuming that's exactly what you think.
Personally, for me, that's my theory on it. I mean, I'm not a fan of the sort of like ram it down your neck activism. I think that just causes arguments, but that's a personal thing. I think if you make little points about the way you conduct yourself, you can raise conversations and have a talk about that with people. And you know, in my job and one of the things I've done, you know, I'm often been put in a position where I have to tell people about my views and tell people about what I think, be it with interviews or TV programs or whatever it is through the music. And you know, you're often asked where you stand. What is your stand? And I'd often say, well, my stand is my local community and the things that are happening up here in the environment and wildlife. You know, environmental pressure across the board is a big thing now, and people are awake to it. It seems funny to me that people aren't more awake to wild salmon and fish farming, especially in Scotland. So, and with regards to, you know, fish farming in the Western Isles is the second biggest employer after the council. So there's rural areas, and I'm pretty sure that fact is right, but it might have changed a little bit. But it certainly was, you know, in years kind of previous. There's entire rural communities that would cease to exist if it wasn't for fish farming. There's entire families that would, you know, it would effectively be clearances of large areas, especially in like the smaller populated areas in the islands. So it's a case of like humans have made the problem, and now the problem is so ingrained that it's actually hard to unravel it all. It's a real bad one.
One of our audience, Hector McLennan, he was wondering your thoughts on enclosed salmon production, how soon it might become financially viable. And I think just before we came together, I was checking out that Norway, I think it's the Starfish project, and I'm not sure if it's actually been stocked with fish yet, but they're doing an enclosed system in a field, which I believe they're claiming that they can collect up to, which is a critical bit, up to 90% of the biological waste. Is there, I mean, there must be interest. Can we push it further? So is there a hunger for new technology and maybe enclosed salmon production instead?
Yeah, absolutely. But again, as I say, the people that are shouting the most about it are the kind of fishermen and the people that care for salmon, and they're in such a minority that I think profit speaks louder than kind of environmental voices in a lot of these matters. And it would be great to see. I did hear, though, that, I mean, certainly last year there was still proposals for new fish farms to get put in Loch Rogue, which feeds two of the most famous salmon fisheries on the island. So I can't see it going anywhere anytime soon, really. And I think most of the other estate owners and gillies would agree with me up here that it's not a problem that is moving anytime soon.
Another one of our viewers, Colin Scott Dempster, he was wondering, it'd be interesting because, as you said, it's right on your doorstep. He was wondering whether the negative impact of open cage salmon farming could be mitigated by increased inspections and increased penalties for non-compliance. The same kind of arguments we've heard used, for example, on cleaning our water, which is anything but clean. So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you'd like to think so, wouldn't you? I mean, I think I would hope that kind of stuff is going on anyway. I would hope that there's people monitoring it on a regular enough basis that these sort of kind of accidents and these things that cause big problems aren't happening. There was a while there, I think, I do remember, like when I was younger, there was a while where cages getting burst and fish escaping was almost like a monthly occurrence. There was something about that. I mean, that certainly doesn't seem to be happening so much anymore, I hope. But in saying that, I still do at least once a season catch a farm fish in one of the systems. So, you know, they're around and they're in the population now. So I hope people are monitoring it. I really do, but I don't know.
But I know salmon and trout, we are publishing as much data on sea lice as can be gathered. I don't want to say anything that might cross any legal lines, but there is some data you can look at. I mean, it's pretty depressing, but I would suggest it doesn't paint a picture as graphically as you described of seeing wild fish covered in lice. Or what the data is telling us is the lice, I believe, that are being relative to the farmed fish. So it's a very different matter when we're looking at the wild fish.
Yeah.
You just said you're out fishing yourself. Did you get much chance to cast a fly, presumably, or do you go down the worming route and other methods?
I only fish fly. I'm a total,
excellent.
I only fish the fly, and I rarely fish for anything other than salmon. Salt water, I do a bit of sea trout fishing in the sea around here, which can be really good. But yeah, salmon bum through and through. Yeah. Excellent.
And your best fish?
Oh, my best fish. I've not had anything massive. I had a nice one, about a 13-pound Hebridean salmon around about there, which is quite large for us. They kind of average about 5-6 pounds, so that was a special one. And I had a particularly nice fish on the Conan a couple of years ago. That was quite memorable, mayfish. So yeah.
Have you had an opportunity to combine touring with fishing? And I can remember Johnny Cash. He used to take maps of every city he toured, and then would engross himself in the culture and the stuff that you could do in that city. And I'm thinking, as a fisherman, touring must provide some wonderful opportunities, or does it?
Always. To be honest, actually, the most of the time when I go on tour, you're never more than about 20 minutes away from somewhere with rainbow trout in it. So it's great, you know. I mean, it's nice and easy, and you just chuck a rod and a few lures in and go and meet some people, have a day chucking a fly at some fish. It's a good way to switch off.
When you're saying switching off, I'm trying to work out how, when you're crofting, how you even get the opportunity. So not only you're crofting last year, but we've also got COVID everywhere, so lockdown and various other inconveniences. How do you get to work or record with someone like Sheryl Crow? I mean, how does that happen when you're up at Lewis?
I'm pretty jammy, always been a bit hammy when it comes to things like that. I met Cheryl. She invited me on to tour one time in the UK, and I've played with her quite a few times. So when I was doing the new album, I'd asked her if she'd sing with me, and she kindly said yes. We did that remotely, so I'd sent her the track. She's got a studio in Nashville, and I was on the croft with my dad rounding up some sheep, and I said, Dad, I've got to go. Sheryl Crow's on the phone. He said, that's the worst excuse I've ever heard.
Yeah, I mean, it can't be easy recording over Skype. How does that process work?
Kind of the norm now, to be honest. You know, everyone's kind of working online. You record on kind of the various recording software you use, and you just send the files all over. It's the way it's done. Like I'll do some stuff here at home. I got a little studio here in the house, and I'll do some bits and pieces here. Then I'll go to London and take the files with me, and then send them off to America. The pedal steel player who lives in Memphis, he played on the album and just sent it over. You get it back a few years later. And yeah, the orchestra, I think the orchestra was in Lithuania or something. We sent it over to them to do that. So yeah.
And meanwhile, the whole time, broadly speaking, you're either in Lewis or down in London, traveling between the two.
Most of the time I'm on the river. Waiting.
Fantastic. Well, then let's go back to fishing just for a moment. I think it's already been said once that Gilly's life is like no other, and it's a pleasure. I'm going to keep confidences. They might even be watching now, so I don't want to share too many of the personal stories. But what's been your best day on a river with a client?
Best day with a client. I'm lucky enough to work at Grimmerstad and to be there. Like, it still has real magic moments. Like that, it's famous as the place that had the most Atlantic salmon in a day. I think it was 54 or 52 fish to one rod in a day. And we don't get that anymore. But there are moments, because the fish come in such compacted little shoals, that if you hit it in one of the pinch points, you can really score. And I've had days with, like, on the boat getting 7 or 8 in the morning with guests, and you lose as many as you hook, and it's just carnage. And yeah, I had some fun days. Although I think the most memorable one was, there was a guy, we were fishing on one of the lochs one day, and the guest hooked this really nice fish, and there was 2 of us, 2 gillies in the boat, and I was sitting in the bow, and it was like, the fish came over the muddler and off he went. I was like, well, that's a real good one. The line's going, and the guy's playing the fish off his old Hardy Perfect, and then the line went all the way through the rod rings and disappeared across the loch. Sir, is your backing tied to your fly line? He says, oh no, I didn't. So we rode after the fish, got the fly line, threaded it by hand. Another gilly threaded it through the rod line. He tied it onto the backing loop, got it back onto the reel, and the guy started playing it, and as he played it just came to the net, it came off.
Oh, that's a cracker. That is a cracking story. That's a cracking story. I love it, not tying the line to the backing. And what about the worst day on a river with a client, or are they all charming?
It's all good stuff. It's all good stuff. I love it. I mean, it's, you know, I guess it's that thing, you fish with a lot of people that have really high stress jobs and can, you know, are there to switch off, and you come, and it's just so nice to be able to accommodate someone's holidays, and you're with people, and you know, they're happiest, and they're just getting to go fishing and having a good time. It's a lovely thing to do.
I've been learning an awful lot in the last few weeks, and that being the guest being in a happy space is exactly that, I think, isn't it? It's a really special thing to witness. Because I was going to ask you, when you're gillying, did you wish you have a rod in your hands, or can you get as much or even more satisfaction from watching and helping somebody else?
No, I don't think I've ever thought I wished I had the rod in my hands, to be honest. It's funny, you're kind of, it's almost like you're fishing through someone. You know, you're a team on the river, and you're there, and you're both. We're lucky as well at Grimmerstad. We've got it's clear water, and there's a few places where you can spot fish, and there's nothing better than shouting to your guest who's fishing a wee hitch to go a bit right, go a bit left, come back a step, and then you see that fish take, and then you're high-fiving and you're like, this is great, team effort, you know. I think that's what I'm like with all my fishing too. When I go fishing with friends, I'm just as happy to sit and take photos and sit on the bank and have a beer, and it's just the whole experience, you know. But I think for me, catching fish is a very, very small part of an entire experience that is fishing, and yeah, that's why I love it, definitely.
Do you feel like, I mean, leading me down these questions, do you find a spiritual side to it when you're on a riverbank? A lot of people feel that.
It's definitely meditative. I think it's definitely kind of, meditative. It separates you, doesn't it? It's like,
Yes.
I enjoy surfing as well, and I think it's a similar thing. It's like when you put on a wetsuit and go in the sea, you're separated from land, and that's it. All you think about is what you're doing. And fishing is the same. As soon as I get a rod in my hand and step on a river, I don't think about anything else in the world. I'm just, oh, that's a nice cast. I wonder if there's a fish in this pool. It's a lovely day to be outside. That's it. That's all that's in my head. And I think that's the spiritual thing. I don't think anyone would argue the fact. I mean, I know that people, I've got friends that love catching fish and they are dedicated to it, but they get that same disconnect from the real world through their pursuit of perfection and trying to catch that fish and be the best fisher. The same way I do is just wandering around with a rod in my hand and enjoying being outside. You know, it's an amazing thing, fishing.
I think it is. I think it is. Do you have angling ambitions? Sort of a bucket list, to put it like that, of places or things you want to do?
Not really. Oh, I do have one. I'd love to catch a salmon in the snow. I've always wanted to catch a salmon in the snow. I remember I was younger, when I was in my teens, and I'd read Trout and Salmon in March, and you're getting excited about the season, and you see a picture of a springer in the snow. Yeah, that's always been a bit of an ambition. Yeah.
Yeah. You'll have to pardon my ignorance, but I would have thought if you're up there in Lewis, you'd have had a very strong chance of catching a salmon in the snow. What's been going on? Is it global warming?
Well, we don't actually get many springers in Lewis. We get a handful of springers. They're very, very rare, but most of our fish are grills that come in sort of end of May, June will be the earliest you get them. I have a friend that did once catch a fish in February in Lewis, and I've hated him ever since because I've not managed to get one. But yeah, it's a rare beast in the Hebrides, a springer. Okay.
Well, another of our audience, Igor Ceretzo, apologies if I've mispronounced your name, sir. He sort of brought the whole farm salmon, wild fish debate really back down to your own doorstep, Colin, because he's asking how the crofting lifestyle generally is going to have to adapt. And I'm thinking primarily in terms of looking at the sort of negative aspects of climate change that are sort of appear to be right on us. I try and see the positives, which are few and far between. But what do you foresee as a future, the next sort of 50 years? What is that going to mean for crofting in the UK, in the Western Isles?
And I think the immediate thing probably is cutting peat. I think that's probably going to be scaled back with fixing and the that kind of whole thing around peat bogs and how important they are. It's not going to affect it initially, I don't think, because where we cut peat and where I've only heard I'm only just starting to hear about this. I've only heard a few things about it, but I think the areas that are carbon fixing and the areas that we cut for fuel are different. But I think peatland regeneration is such a big thing. I think that's going to affect it. To be honest, though, there's so few people that do it now that it's kind of a dying thing. And the people that do it, myself and people in the village, I think we're only too happy to put tradition aside for the planet. You know, I think that's an important thing, and you have to make some hard choices, and you have to lay things down that you would like to keep going from a tradition point of view, and because your grandfather or whatever did it. But I think planet's more important, and you just have to make those sacrifices for the next generation so that they can have a nice place to live in.
It sounds like you've already adapted, that you've made changes.
Yeah, we're lucky. Crofting is very low impact, and it is actually quite environmentally friendly. We small scale farming, we have I mean, I have 20 sheep on a combined area of about 400 acres of land, you know, between moorland and you know, the Crofting, the moorland, the extended moorland, the recedings, all this area that I have available to my disposal on the island. I have 20 sheep, so it's very small scale. It's very impact. It's minimal in the grand scheme of things, and even collectively as a kind of crofting across the islands and Ireland, I don't think have so much crofting left, but the west coast of Scotland up to the Highlands, if you collected it all together, the amount of sheep wouldn't compare to a New Zealand farmer, you know, or a Australian outback farmer. So it's negligible what it does for the environment. So, but we'll see. I think everybody's going to have to make changes in the years to come.
Yeah, with the crofting lifestyle, and again, forgive me, but I mean, the stereotypical view is that, you know, it's a hard life, and there's obviously great pleasure. You find great pleasure in it, but how hard is it? What's the reality? I mean, do you, when you see media perceptions of crofting lifestyle, do you balk at them?
No, not really. I think it's pretty accurate. I mean, it's not is it a hard life? No, it's not a hard life. It's a really good way to live. But I think that because I love it, other people would be like, I'm not going out at 4 a.m. to pull a sheep out of a sheep. That's crazy talk. But it's, you know, I think if you're not born into it, I think farming in general, I think it's something that you're born into generally, but it's also something that you love and have a passion for. I know, like my auntie and uncle have a big farm down outside Glasgow, and you know, it's a passion. He does it because his father did and his grandfather did it, and that's the thing. If you look at it from the outside and think that's a hard way of life, then you were never meant for it anyway, so you don't have to worry about it. I suppose.
I was thinking more, you also said it's sort of dying out, and you've seen, you know, just the music is a one way we can connect to our roots. And it's just there's a whole sort of cultural aspect to crofting, I suppose, that I can't find it hard to believe it will be extinguished altogether, but there must come a point when it becomes endangered, like salmon.
Yeah, it's changing. I think the islands are changing drastically at the moment. To be honest, for the better. When I was younger, I was in school, there was a lot of talk about aging population and places like this being basically in how you wouldn't be able to live in a place like this when you grow up, because there'd be no jobs, and crofting's dying out and the islands are dying out. But because now this has become quite a desirable place to live and there's a nice way of life, there's been an influx of people moving up here, which has really rejuvenated the community, and it's an amazing thing. But what happens with that inevitably is that things change, and things change for good reason. You know, my dad's generation, my grandfather's generation were all crofters and were hard living crofters, and it was a hard life. And my father's generation didn't want a part of it. They were like, we want to live in the town, we want to have gas heaters, we want to go to the pub on Saturday, we don't want to be on the croft all day. So it was already going through that change, and now it's going through another change where people are coming and embracing the lifestyle, and that's great, and that's rejuvenating crofting, but it in turn sort of changes it and makes it into something else. So it's I guess it's progress, isn't it? It's just life, it's just the way it goes, and you just got to roll with the times and roll with the punches.
I think that's about 18,500, I think, the population. So any influx of younger blood in there, I would like to think is going to have a positive effect.
Save the islands. It's absolutely saved the islands. It really has. The kind of younger. When I left school, I think there was a handful of people my age that stayed on the island. I think 5 people from my year in school stayed on the island, and the rest, 90 odd, however it was, all left. And now all my friends and all my people I've met, be it through surfing or fishing or whatever, they're all people that have moved up here, and they move here because they love the place and they want to be here and they embrace it, and they're not resenting being here. So it's great. It's a really, really positive thing. It's yeah.
I think you've said before about some of your music that there's a sense in some of the songs that people that their stories start out on the islands, then they go somewhere to fulfill their dream, and then they come back slightly downbeaten by the whole experience.
Yeah. That's a little bit of a usual tale on the islands, definitely, especially for those trying to go and make their fortunes in the big city, and they come back with their tail between their legs. Yeah.
And for you, with the music, do you write in your head? Can you write in your head while you're lambing or working on the land, whatever you're doing at any time? Does the music run simultaneously, or do you have to sort of come back, sit down, have a whiskey, whatever it is? What is your tipple, by the way?
It's a little dram. Yeah, a little Balvenie, my favourite dram.
Ah, very nice, very nice. So when does the songwriting fit into the crofting lifestyle?
I think I'm quite a overthinker, thinking all the time, definitely. Whenever I kind of sit down, I think I've been doing it long enough now that I know when I can write a song. It's a strange feeling you kind of get. I think if I sat down in the morning, just any morning with my guitar, and I tried for 3 hours, I wouldn't come up with anything. But if I wake up in the morning, I'm like, oh, I got that feeling, I can sit down. And so it's percolating all the time. I think that's the way it is for me. I think that's the way it is for most of my friends as well, the way they do it. You know, you just, it's kind of sitting all the time, and it's kind of going around your head, and you're thinking about things, and the melodies are the same and the music's the same. Just kind of, and when it's ready, it's ready. I don't know. It's a very odd thing to quantify songwriting. Some people are very methodical about it, and they kind of, a lot of my friends are professional songwriters. They go in the morning, they make a cup of coffee, and they write a hit single, and they can I don't know how they can do it. But with me, it's a bit of a, you know, is it time? Oh, I've got one. Right, let's go. Write it down. Yeah.
I'm always fascinated as to what comes easiest or quickest, words or melody.
Oh, melody.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. I have a bit of a fight with the words, but the melodies and the music. I always do melodies and music first. I think if you do the words first, you're a poet or a writer first, and then musician second. But I think musicians generally, it's always music first, and then you try and find the words to suit the melody.
Okay. And I'm just thinking of one final question, and it's just going back to when you said you were working with your dad, and Sheryl Crow was on the phone, and it was the worst excuse he'd heard. So I'm now thinking you're out on your favourite beat, you've got the best spring salmon on, but you've not had one, so this is your big spring salmon, and someone comes, Sheryl Crow's on the phone. Would you say, go away, I'm playing a salmon, or would you hand your rod to your friend and let them play the salmon while you took the call?
I'll phone her back.
Good man. Does she fish? Does she have any interest in fishing?
I think she does, actually. I think because where they live in Nashville, it's kind of a bit of a fishy area. Her drummer, especially, he was really keen. I was planning on taking him out fishing, but of course COVID, and they didn't get back for that tour. So, but yeah, fishing's always a good one. Everybody knows a little bit about fishing, don't they? So you can always get people out for a wee cast.
What I just on a final then, you mentioned touring. I know that you did have a tour which had to be cancelled because of COVID. When can people see you next?
At the moment, not really sure. We're still kind of making plans for that, but I'm playing at we've got a big festival on the island, the Heb Celt Festival in July. I'll be playing at that big hometown show, and then we'll see what happens in the end of the year and kind of new year. So yeah, hopefully get out and do a few shows once the fishing season's finished.
I have to say, Colin, I mean, there's no doubting your enthusiasm and passion for fishing, and it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, sir. And I'm sure everybody's enjoyed your company as much as I have. I'll sign off by saying enjoy the rest of your Balvenie. I need another beer, and enjoy your fishing, everybody. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Right, thanks, man. Good to talk to you.
You too.